This is Dr. Michio Kaku, Professor of Theoretical Physics at the City College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And this is Exploration. Every week in Exploration, we discuss the fascinating world of science and its impact on society. And today, leading off, we're going to summarize some of the top stories of the past week and also answer some of the questions that I get by email. It's impossible for me to answer all the emails individually, so I'd like to address all of them collectively on radio. First of all, our hearts go out to the victims of that horrendous fire in London. A 24-story skyscraper simply goes up in flames within a matter of minutes to perhaps 1 hour, and it should not have happened. There was something wrong with the engineering and the physics of that building. And I'll say a few things about that. Also, I get a lot of emails concerning, well, the job market. Donald Trump says that we have to keep factories in the United States at all costs. The enemy there is globalization. Other people say that it's automation. Automation is causing the loss of jobs, especially for white workers. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? And what are the causes of this job loss? Also, a new study from the Czech Republic says that dangers from asteroid collisions are a lot greater than previously thought. And so we'll say a few things about the revised figures for one day being hit by a meteor from outer space. And then news about autism. Quite frankly, scientists do not know where autism comes from or how to cure it. However, there is a tantalizing new report coming out of Columbia. The Columbia School of Public Health analyzed 95,000 children born between 1999 and 2009, and they find a very surprising correlation between autism and something that was not previously suspected. And then on the medical front, we'll say a few things about cancer. It turns out there's a new cancer drug on the market, which is actually causing quite a stir. First of all, it's horrendously expensive and exotic. This new drug costs $156,000 per year, but it could be a miracle drug against certain forms of cancer. So we'll say a few things about the latest concerning cancer research. Well, let's just jump right into some of the top stories of the past week. Our lead story today, as I mentioned, concerns that horrendous fire in London, which should not have happened. Eyewitness accounts say that within 30 minutes to an hour, the fire went from the 4th floor of this building all the way up to near the top of this 24-story high-rise. It meant that scores of individuals were trapped. The death toll keeps rising almost by the hour. And the question is, why? It should not have happened. Well, first of all, we don't know the whole story. In fact, it may take weeks before a definitive study is made. However, every engineer that's been interviewed so far say that they are flabbergasted that a fire like this could not have been contained on one floor, and the fact that it skyrocketed and basically hit every single floor in the entire building within a matter of minutes. So the final verdict will come out perhaps weeks from now. However, the finger is now being pointed in certain directions, and of course, time will tell whether or not the early speculations are correct. The first speculation is about the sprinkler system. Some reports indicate that this building is old, in fact so old, dating back to the 1970s, that it was not required to have a mandatory sprinkler system. So in other words, maybe there was a loophole that allowed the builders of this building to get away with creating it without an adequate sprinkler system. But most of the speculation, and it is speculation, is focused on the cladding. That is, the outer sheath of material used to surround the entire building. The cladding there has insulation in the interior. They're basically flat panels that you put on the outside of the building. The speculation is that the insulation may not have been correct. The speculation is that perhaps it was a form of polyurethane in the insulation that actually helped to spread the fire very rapidly. That would in part explain why the fire spread so quickly and went from floor to floor, jumping rapidly all the way to the top, if indeed it was the insulation in the outer cladding of the building. Some engineers have pointed out to the fact that similar fires have also taken place in other cities around the world that also had problems with cladding. If it's true that that was one of the major sources of the problem, it means there has to be a revision in the code. Perhaps the building inspectors were lax, perhaps the company manufactured them with a defect, or perhaps new regulations have to be imposed to make sure that a problem like this does not ever occur again. Well, I get a lot of emails, of course, and some of the emails concern President Donald Trump's strategy. Everybody knows that factories have been leaving the United States, and among the hardest hit are white workers. And the question is, how do we keep the factories from leaving? How do we keep the jobs from leaving? President Trump's idea is to focus in on globalization. Well, yes, by creating tax incentives, by talking and strong-arming some of these companies, it may be possible to stop the tide a bit. However, there's another theory, and I personally think that it's a combination of the two. The other theory says that it's automation. That automation is also replacing some of these jobs that white workers once had. And then the question is, what do you do about it? Well, if you believe in Donald Trump's point of view, you try to give tax incentives to companies to stay, you try to strong-arm them to staying, you try to rewrite the codes and regulations and tax levies and so on and so forth. The other possibility is education. Nobody says you can turn back the hands of time. You cannot uninvent the computer. The computer is out there. Even if you try to muzzle the computer, your competitor will use computers and drive you out of business. So you can't simply turn back the hands of time, but you can educate workers and also plan for new industries. Some people have pointed out that the city of Pittsburgh, which was once wedded with big steel, went bankrupt decades ago and then reinvented itself. Carnegie Mellon is in Pittsburgh. We've had a lot of investment in high-tech engineering in that city, so why not? Why not switch from steel and nuclear energy to high technology, modern medicine, and job-creating industries? And so some people are saying that it's really more complicated, that we should, A, educate workers to be part of the computer revolution, and B, make sure that the industries there are modernized to take into account the fact that, one, our demographics are changing, more people are getting elderly and therefore need medical care, and B, we see this explosion in information technologies and related technologies that involve the computer. So why not encourage that? Why not make seed money possible to create new industries, tax benefits for entrepreneurs? Why not get the motor of innovation going, in addition to perhaps reining in some of these runaway shops? And so this is a problem that's not going to go away because automation is not going to go away. But then the next question people raise is, well, what jobs are being threatened by innovation? Let's say you go back to junior college and you take cram courses in a different subject. You don't want to take cram courses in a field that's going to go obsolete in the future. You want to be one step ahead of the game. And so where are the jobs going to be in the future? Well, as I said before, one huge source of jobs will be in the biomedical field because of the fact that the baby boomers are aging and the baby boomers have a little bit of money. And so that's one huge area. Information technologies, as I mentioned, is a huge area. But one area you should keep away from is being the middleman. If you are the middleman, and you are involved in inventory, bean counting, tracking things, being like a search engine, well, those jobs are going to be phased out. For example, if you work in a law office, you may think twice about being a paralegal because in the future,
it'll be possible to write software programs that have sophisticated search engines that can replace the job of paralegals, much of which involves being a search engine. However, you may want to become a lawyer instead, because there you have a job that can not be replaced easily by computers. Only a lawyer can argue to a jury. Only a lawyer can argue with a judge. And only a lawyer can understand the ins and outs of human behavior that is sometimes crucial in the area of law. So being the middleman is one type of job you should avoid because of the fact that, well, that's what computers are good at. We forget that computers are adding machines. They add 1 million times faster than us, giving us the illusion that they're really thinking. And so there are areas in the computer revolution which are blind spots, and that's where the jobs of the future are going to be. The blind spots include, first of all, interfacing with humans. Jobs that involve direct communication with people. For example, arguing to a jury or to a judge, or arguing directly to customers and convincing them of the benefits of your product. Things that involve interaction with the public. That's very difficult for computers to handle. Second, pattern recognition. Computers are very bad at recognizing patterns. When they walk into a room, they see circles, lines, squares, rectangles, and triangles. They don't see table. They don't see paper, computer. They don't see these things that we take for granted. They don't understand tableness. They don't understand things that we just take for granted, even though they see better than us. And third, robots do not understand common sense. They don't know that water is wet. They don't know that mothers are older than their daughters. They don't know that animals do not like pain. They don't know that when you die, you don't come back the next day. They don't know that strings can pull, but strings cannot push. Or that sticks can push, but sticks cannot pull. We learned that by bumping into reality. The school of hard knocks, the mother of all experiences, bumping into things. But you see, robots don't bump into things. Robots learn because somebody programmed that learning into them. But programming common sense has proven to be simply too difficult even for our greatest computer at the present time. And so jobs that involve common sense, that is, human skills like innovation, creativity, management, analysis, leadership, these are things that robots cannot do. Jobs involving pattern recognition, for example, being a gardener, being a construction worker, a garbage man. Believe it or not, robots can't replace those jobs because robots cannot recognize garbage. Robots cannot recognize plants. Robots cannot recognize a construction site because they are semi-skilled jobs. The jobs that will be replaced by robots are jobs that are repetitive, that involve the same motion over and over again. Those jobs, I'm sorry to say, are going to go out the window. Jobs that are repetitive, that involve simple pattern recognition, yes, those jobs are going to go out the window. And so once again, I think the cure for this problem is A, education, educating workers to meet the demands of the future market, B, jobs in the medical field, and C, investment with new types of technologies, new companies, new startups that can create the jobs of the future. Also, news about autism. It's one of the great embarrassments of science that we don't know what autism is. We don't know how to cure it. We don't know where it comes from. But here's a new report from Columbia University, the School of Public Health, which puts a whole new spin on autism. First of all, they analyzed 95,000 children. I repeat, this is just not talking to a mother about her autistic child. They followed 95,000 children born between 1999 and 2009, and what they found was very interesting. They found that if the mother had a fever anytime during pregnancy, there was a 34% rise in the incidence of autism. If the mother had a fever around the second trimester, it meant a 40% increase in autism. And get this, it turns out that if a mother had 3 or more fevers after the 12th week of pregnancy, there was an astounding 300% increase in autism. This is a staggering study whose implications are still being questioned and taken apart. We don't really know what it means. All we know is that there seems to be a link between infection, inflammation, that is, getting a fever, and the incidence of autism. Now, I should also point out that there's a genetic component because siblings of autistic kids have a higher chance of coming down with autism themselves, and certain forms of autism might even run in certain families. So there is a genetic component. However, that's not all. It turns out that many diseases like schizophrenia cannot be traced to a single gene at all. For example, you could have twins. One twin is schizophrenic, and the other twin is normal. And so you know, therefore, that things like schizophrenia are multigenic with an influence from the environment. Here, it seems to add credibility to the theory that, yes, there's something linked to the environment, in this case, an infection or inflammation. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean there's a virus involved? Does it mean that the body overreacted and basically inflammation began as a consequence? Scientists don't know. It just means, however, that this is one avenue that people should investigate very seriously. Now, it turns out that some of these women were given anti-fever drugs like ibuprofen and acetaminophen. However, the sample size of those women taking those drugs was too small to make any definitive statements. It seemed that the rate of autism seemed to be a little bit less for those mothers that took these drugs, but it was too small to make a statistical statement. However, the main statement applies, and that is there is a 300% increase in the incidence of autism if a woman has 3 or more fevers after the 12th week of pregnancy. So this is something that has to be looked at very carefully. Also, news on the cancer front. There's a new cancer drug now coming on the market, which is causing a lot of stir, so much that there was a big story in the New York Times science section about it. This drug is rather exotic. Hold on to your seats. Per year, this drug costs $156,000. So it raises a philosophical question. Are you willing to spend $150,000 a year for a drug that may save your life? Well, here's the background to the study. First of all, doctors took 86 cancer patients with terminal cancer. I repeat, terminal cancer. Everything was applied to these individuals and nothing worked. These people were going to die. Science had basically washed their hands of these people, shook their heads, and said, basically, get your personal affairs in order because there's nothing we can do. Well, these 86 cancer patients were chosen for a study, and the results of the study were staggering. First of all, 66 of these 86 patients had their tumors shrink drastically, and 18 of them apparently were cured. That is, they can find no remnants of the original cancer. This is incredible. Out of 86 terminally ill cancer patients, these people were told they will die. 18 were apparently cured. And how did this drug work? First of all, the name of the drug is pembrolizumab. As I mentioned, it's quite expensive because of the enormous cost in developing it, $156,000 per year for this drug. And how does it work? Well, you see, usually doctors divide cancers according to the organ of the body that's infected, like lung cancer, skin cancer, and prostate cancer, and so on and so forth. However, there's another way to categorize anti-cancer drugs, and that is by the mutation. Now, in other words, one mutation may be involved with a whole series of cancers. And that's the novelty of this new study. They didn't look at a particular organ. They looked at a class of cancers due to a single type of mutation. Now, it turns out that your body recognizes cancer cells and can kill them. That's right. It turns out that all the time, cancer cells spontaneously develop in the body recognizes them and zaps them. And then the question is, well, if that's true, then how come some cancers get out of control? And the answer is, some cancers develop a protein coat. It's sort of like a cloaking device. It allows them to be invisible to the cell's immune system. So I repeat, normal cells, normal cancer cells, can in fact be identified by your immune system and kill them, and this actually happens all the time. However, some of these cancer cells develop a protein coat that makes them invisible to your immune system. Now, this is where this new drug comes in. This new drug strips away the protein coat so that it becomes visible. In other words, it's unmasked. Therefore, the body's own immune system then takes over and zaps those cancer cells. And so, I repeat, this is a new way to attack cancer. Instead of poisoning it with chemotherapy, which of course has horrendous side effects because of the fact you're killing normal cells as well as cancer cells, this is a new line of attack. Instead of segregating cancers by organ, this looks at a common mutation. Now, that's the good news. What's the bad news besides the cost? The bad news is that this mutation is kind of rare. Only 4%. 4% of cancer patients have this particular mutation. But this mutation applies to a whole class of cancers, not restricted to just one organ, because one type of mutation may be responsible for many different kinds of organs coming down with cancer. So, the stampede is on. Many doctors are now saying, oh my God, if this drug can basically cure cancer in terminally ill patients by targeting a mutation, why not target other mutations? For example, P53. P53 is a very common cancer mutation involved in 50% of all cancers. It's a very long gene, meaning that it's very easy to damage it or break it, and that's why 50% of all common cancers can be linked to a defect in P53. If one day people can have a drug that is responsive to those cancer cells with that particular mutation, it could really rewrite history. Well, we'll see how it develops. So far, the indications are good, but like I say, we have to verify it. We have to confirm that this is, in fact, a solid result and not a spurious one. And now I'd like to say a few things about outer space. That's right, outer space. There's a new report coming out from the Czech Republic about asteroids from outer space. Right now, the U.S. government and amateur astronomers are tracking NEOs, near-Earth objects, of which we have found thousands. These near-Earth objects cross the orbit of the planet Earth. That doesn't mean they're going to hit us, but it does mean that we have to be careful because they will cross the path of the Earth. But we thought we were tracking most of them. Well, here's a report from the Czech Republic that says, there's a whole new class of asteroids that were neglected. It turns out that when you have a meteor shower, there's a comet that goes streaking across the heavens, and the tail of the comet has lots of debris. When the debris enters the atmosphere of the Earth, it causes a meteor shower. So a meteor shower is caused by the fragments found in the tail of a comet. That's why we have Halley's Comet, but that's also the reason why we have the Leonid meteor shower. Because when an ancient comet sailed through the solar system, the Earth goes through the remnants of that ancient tail, and that's why we have this shower of meteors coming from the sky. Well, astronomers in the Czech Republic analyzed the debris, and they found that, yes, there are asteroids that could be potentially dangerous lurking among this debris. Some of them perhaps as big as 1,000 feet across. Now, just realize that asteroids which skim across the night sky, streaking across the sky, they're not that big. They may be marble size, the size of a book. Not too much to really hit the Earth. They basically light up the night sky, but not much more. However, you're now talking about asteroids about the size of a table. about the size of a building. And they, in fact, can hit the Earth, but again, they don't cause that much damage. Once you get an asteroid about the size of an apartment building, that's when you start to get city busters. In fact, two of them, not one, but two of them, hit Russia within the last century or so. We had the famous Tunguska incident, and also we have the incident that took place just a few years ago over Chelyabinsk in Russia. And so Russia has been hit twice by the city busters. These are city busters because in turn, they could, if they hit London or Berlin, wipe them out. But beyond that, we now have nation busters. Nation busters are meteors 1,000 or so feet across, like the ones that were found by the astronomers in the Czech Republic. Also, Apophis. Apophis is an asteroid. It's about 1,000 feet across, about the size of the Rose Bowl, and it'll skim the atmosphere of the Earth in 2029 and come back for a repeat in 2036. The danger there is that it will actually skim not just the atmosphere of the Earth, it'll come so close to the surface of the Earth that it will fly underneath our satellites. Let me repeat that. It'll be a very close call. The Apophis asteroid, 1,000 feet across, capable of knocking out a good chunk of England, will skim the Earth, flying underneath our satellites. And so this means, of course, that we have to be extra careful in terms of monitoring all the NEOs, near-Earth objects, that can cross the orbit of the planet Earth and perhaps one day, God forbid, hit the Earth. And just remember that you're not going to find Bruce Willis in the movie Armageddon knocking out comets and asteroids from the sky. We are sitting ducks to a giant asteroid collision. We have nothing in our arsenal capable of taking out such an object. The space shuttle has been canceled, and in fact, the space shuttle couldn't even reach these comets in deep space. And sometimes using an H-bomb to blow them up is the worst thing to do, because then you have lots of baby asteroids coming at you. So, a word to the wise. Perhaps we should spend a little bit more money tracking these monster asteroids, and even one day getting an insurance policy, a super space shuttle, to take them out if they get too close to the planet Earth. So, it's a word to the wise. Welcome. Once again, this is Dr. Michio Kaku, Professor of Theoretical Physics at the City College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and this is the second half of Exploration. In the first half of Exploration, we summarized some of the top stories in science, and in the second half, we're going to talk about one of the most ancient of all quests, and that is the quest for immortality. Is it possible that science can give us the gift of eternal life? With us today is a professor who will talk to us today about some of the latest developments, Professor Jay Olshansky, and we're going to talk about his book, The Quest for Immortality. Let me say, of course, that this quest goes all the way back. It even predates the Bible. One of the earliest references to the quest for immortality was in the Tales of Gilgamesh, which probably predate most of the Bible. Gilgamesh was a Sumerian warrior who had many exploits, but why? Why was he roaming the countryside? Because he was in search of the Fountain of Youth. And so one of the oldest tales in human history revolves around the Fountain of Youth, not to mention the Bible itself. After all, when Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, the question is, well, why? Because Adam wanted the apple of knowledge, the apple that would give him the secret of immortality. And God got very angry about that and expelled Adam and Eve and made them mortal as a consequence. Also, Chinese mythology talks about immortality. In the year 200 BC, the greatest king of China emerged, Emperor Qin, and he unified the entire Chinese nation for the first time. Even though he could conquer all his enemies, there was one thing he could not conquer, and that is the wrinkles on his face. He was getting old. And so he assembled all his princes and warriors and sent them out on a journey. And the journey was to find the fountain of youth. And then he gave them one order, just one order, and that is, find the fountain of youth or don't come back. Well, apparently they did not find the fountain of youth, and they were so afraid of coming back, where they would probably be killed, well, they probably settled in new lands. And many people think that perhaps that's where Japan and Korea come from, because if you look at the oldest evidence for human settlements of a modern type in Japan, it goes back to 200 BC, the very time when Emperor Qin sent his princes and his greatest naval officers to find the fountain of youth. Also, we have a tale of Greek mythology concerning the aging process. Aurora was the goddess of the dawn, and however, she fell in love with a mortal, Tithonus. And so she begged Zeus, the father of the gods, for a gift. And that is, please, she said, give my mortal lover the gift of immortality. Because the gods, of course, are immortal. They live forever, but humans don't. Humans are mortal. So Zeus, well, he felt sorry for Aurora, so he granted Aurora's mortal lover the gift of immortality. However, it's a sad story, because Aurora forgot to ask for something else. She forgot to ask for eternal youth. As a consequence, Tithonus, being mortal, simply got older and older and older, but could never die. He became decrepit, but he could never die. He was suffering, but he could never die. And so the lesson here is, if you ever get the wish of immortality, for God's sake, ask for eternal youth as well, or else you may be spending an eternity in a nursing home. Okay, once again, our special guest today is Professor Jay Olshansky, talking about the aging process and the quest for immortality. And now I'd like to bring on our special guest for today. We're very delighted to have with us Professor S.J. Olshansky. He's a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and he's also a research institute at the Center on Aging at the University of Chicago. Well, if you've been to the drugstore, you've probably been hit with all these advertising saying that you can retard the aging process, even roll back the hands of time, live longer, they say. But what about the truth? The truth about human growth hormone, antioxidants, massive doses of vitamins and minerals and herbs and supplements. What about the hardcore truth and scientific verification of these claims? And also, what about genetics? We seem to be teasing apart many of the genes that influence the aging process. So once again, we're going to bring on our special guest today, Professor Jay Olshansky, and he's the co-author of a book called The Quest for Immortality. So that's the subject of today's discussion, immortality. Now, I understand that today you and other prominent scientists have issued a policy statement, a recommendation of sorts that could have serious and beneficial economic benefits. Could you elaborate?
Yes. This is based on an article we published in The Scientist back in March of this year with Rich Miller from the University of Michigan, Dan Perry from the Alliance for Aging Research, and Bob Butler from the International Longevity Center in New York. And we basically suggested that the time has arrived for societies, not just the United States, but really all nations, to begin investing in an effort to slow the biological process of aging in people. And the logic and the rationale is fairly straightforward. Basically, what we're suggesting is that even a small deceleration or slowdown in the rate of biological aging of just a few years would actually yield huge economic and health benefits. I mean, think of it this way. The way the NIH is currently set up is essentially to deal with one disease at a time, independent of all others. But if you can find a way to slow down the biological process of aging, you would essentially postpone everything that is negative associated with growing older into later and later ages. It would be as if you achieved a major discovery for every major fatal and non-fatal disease if you could find a way to slow aging. So we're calling on Congress to begin investing in a concerted effort to slow the biological process of aging in people.
Yes, in fact, the social benefits could be astronomical, especially as you look at the baby boomers that are hitting 60 and will eventually increase medical costs tremendously in this country.
Yes, I mean, the prevalence of conditions of frailty and disability will rise dramatically in the coming decades with the aging of the baby boom cohort. So slowing that process even a little bit would actually enable people to be healthier longer, contribute to the economy longer. They would just everything positive associated with aging. There are positive things associated with aging would be extended. So it would be an extraordinarily important event for national economies, for public health. Really, the time has arrived, I think. And not only has the time arrived, but the science is approaching the level at which I think we're beginning to gain enough understanding that we think we can do this in humans. We know we can do it in other animals. We think we can do this in humans.
Okay, now let's get back to Earth and talk about hokum, snake oil, and real science. If you visit the drugstore, you realize that there are whole shelves full of herbs and remedies and vitamins, making all sorts of promises about retarding the aging process, reversing the years. So let's now talk about the science, that is what is known experimentally. Let's start with the Internet, where we have lots of advertisements for human growth hormone. Now, in some sense, are the people of America being used as guinea pigs for this gigantic experiment on human growth hormone, or what are your thoughts?
Well, actually, people are using themselves as guinea pigs. It's absolutely remarkable that you can go on the Internet and find every conceivable nutritional supplement and hormone, including growth hormone, with people with no expertise in the field claiming that it can slow, stop, or reverse the biological process of aging. And people believe this. They spend enormous sums of money. They order this stuff over the Internet. They inject themselves with it or take these pills. And there isn't a shred of evidence that it'll make you live any longer. There actually is some evidence, some suggestive evidence that some of these substances, including growth hormone, have the potential to actually shorten your life. So it's remarkable that people are conducting a biological experiment on themselves. It doesn't mean that there isn't value necessarily to some nutritional supplements, particularly for people who are deficient in certain vitamins and minerals. There's no question that there is a benefit for those individuals. But if your diet is so bad that you're deficient in some major vitamin or mineral or something, that these vitamin supplements aren't going to make up the difference. It simply isn't going to work. And there's no evidence that it actually extends life.
And what about the side effects of human growth hormone? Some people think maybe cancer or other kinds of diseases associated with accelerating metabolism. It's like a sports car. If you were to accelerate a sports car, you throw off a few gears here and there. And that, of course, means cancer, because cancer in some sense is genetic errors. But what are your thoughts about side effects of human growth hormone?
Well, first of all, it has been demonstrated that there are some benefits, believe it or not, associated with growth hormone, including increased muscle mass and reduction in the rate of bone loss and improved skin elasticity. So you can't deny the fact that there have been benefits associated with it. But accompanying those benefits have been risks, including carpal tunnel syndrome, increased risk of diabetes. There is suggestive evidence that it might increase the risk of cancer. The fact is that it hasn't been properly studied yet using clinical trials in humans. And so before those clinical trials are in, before we know what the results are, it's really premature to be using these kinds of substances. And again, once again, with the case of growth hormone, there isn't any evidence that it extends life.
Okay, now moving on, when you go to the drugstore, you see these advertisements for mega vitamins. Some claim that it retards the oxidation process. Other people cite certain studies which show that if you ingest certain diets rich in vitamins, it seems to be good for you. But what about the pure form of vitamins that you buy in the drugstore?
Well, once again, the nutritional supplement industry is really working hard to convince us that aging is somehow caused by either the loss of some hormone or the lack of nutritional supplements of one kind or another, and they're perfectly willing to sell you everything that they can to try to convince you that you can somehow influence this process. And it's based in part on on science. Where it's suggested that aging is influenced by oxidation, and this oxidation process can be slowed down in theory with the ingestion of certain nutritional supplements that have antioxidative effects. But there isn't any empirical evidence that demonstrates that these substances actually extend duration of life. So once again, it's the same scenario. Where people are selling something with exaggerated claims, with a profit motive in mind, and people are buying it up like crazy.
And what about herbs? Some people say that maybe pure vitamins that are refined by the chemical companies may not simulate vitamins in the natural forms. So what about taking herbal medicines? What is known or not known about herbs?
Now, honestly, I don't know that much about herbs and herbal medicines to comment on that. But what I can tell you is that there's plenty of evidence that eating more fruits and vegetables and can certainly lower your risk of a wide variety of diseases and disorders. And of course, those in the supplement industry are suggesting that contained within those fruits and vegetables there are certain substances that they can concentrate in a pill and give to you in a larger form, under the assumption that more is better. Well, there is where the evidence is lacking. The evidence is there that eating more fruits and vegetables is good for you. The evidence is lacking that the nutritional supplements containing the vitamins that they think are causing the beneficial effect, the evidence there is lacking that will have any significant effect.
Okay, now moving on, let's talk about something that actually does work. I think all scientists would say unanimously that there is one and only one proven way, in the animal kingdom anyway, of actually increasing the lifespan of animals. We don't know whether it works for humans yet. But let's talk about caloric restriction. First of all, what is it, and what tests have been done? Well,
you're right. This is the one intervention that's been demonstrated repeatedly to extend duration of life on a wide variety of species. It's basically reducing your caloric intake. It can, vary. The percentage can vary from anywhere from 10 to 30% below maintenance levels. So it would depend on what your current height and weight is. But, if your normal caloric intake is 2,000 calories to maintain your weight, you might be reducing it down to 15, for example, 1,500 calories. And no one exactly knows why it works or how it works, the underlying mechanism, but there is consistent research suggesting that it extends duration of life. Now, the question is, how does it do so? Does it extend duration of life by slowing the biological process of aging? Some people believe that to be the case. Others suggest that it actually extends duration of life by reducing the risk of a wide variety of diseases and disorders, which is not the same as slowing the biological process of aging. Remember, if you reduce the risk of heart disease, cancer, and stroke, however you do that, through exercise or diet, the aging process marches on. It's uninfluenced by that. But if indeed you're slowing down the biological process of aging, then everything negative associated with it is dragged to later ages. It's postponed to later ages. And that would actually be a wonderful thing if caloric restriction was the mechanism that actually worked. Now, don't expect, by the way, that people are going to be living longer by dramatically reducing their caloric intake. What the scientists are looking for is the underlying mechanism to find a way to mimic that process without actually reducing your caloric intake. It should be obvious, by the way, that in the United States and elsewhere, we're doing the exact opposite. We are increasing our caloric intake. We are growing more obese at a more rapid pace than we ever have in the past. So this research is particularly important and is interesting for a wide variety of reasons.
Okay, now caloric restriction works on yeast cells, spiders, insects, mice, and now for the first time we're getting the first preliminary evidence from primate studies done in Bethesda, Maryland. So can you tell us a little bit about some of those experiments? Because primates, of course, are closer to us, and perhaps it may work on organisms as complex as us. But what are your thoughts?
Well, my guess is it probably will. I mean, the work of Richard Weinrich from Wisconsin and other researchers at NIH at Bethesda have, I think, demonstrated quite convincingly that reducing caloric intake can lower the risk of disease. Probably it will extend duration of life. We have to wait for these animals to live long enough to determine whether or not that's going to be one of the consequences. But there are a couple of problems here. In some of the earlier studies, you need to remember that the control animals that were used in the caloric restriction studies were fed ad libitum, meaning they had as much food as they wanted, which is sort of like us. And so whenever you reduce your caloric intake relative to eating as much as you want, what you are demonstrating is more the detrimental effect of a gluttonous lifestyle rather than the longevity-enhancing effect of caloric restriction. So you have to be careful on how you interpret that. Now, in more recent studies, the control animals are not fed ad libitum. They are fed really more of a maintenance diet. And you're not seeing quite the large differences in duration of life in these two populations when you do it that way. Nevertheless, you do see reductions in the risk of a wide variety of diseases and disorders, and we would all be better off if we reduced our caloric intake. Whether it would work in humans at the level that we see in these other species, I think is highly questionable. And there's a real concern when, for example, you extend the duration of life of a fruit fly or a roundworm nematode by 3, 4, or 5-fold. It's real tempting for researchers to then multiply the human life expectancy by 3, 4, or 5 and suggest that the same effect, if it occurred in humans, would make us live hundreds and hundreds of years. My guess is we wouldn't see anywhere near that kind of magnitude, increase in magnitude and duration of life in humans. But if we could, live healthier longer for just, an extra 5 or 10 years, that would be huge.
Okay, now I understand that the animals that have been studied seem to be a little bit lethargic because they have such a restricted diet. They have less cancerous tumors, less incidences of diseases associated with the aging process, but they also seem to lack an interest in the sex drive. That is, all the things that make life worth living, joie de vivre. These animals seem to be pretty lethargic. Is that true?
Yeah, I understand it. There appears to be a price to pay. There appears to be lower fecundity, less interest in sex, and I think a difficult problem with controlling body temperature. These animals are cold. In fact, feel cold. And in fact, in the case of humans who are conducting this experiment on themselves, they're essentially reporting the same thing. So there is a price, at least for now, to be paid by adopting this calorically restricted diet, which is why, as I suggested earlier, reducing your caloric intake to these kinds of levels probably isn't the way it's going to work in humans. The way it's probably going to work in humans is that scientists will try to find some sort of mimetic, something that will fool the body into believing that it's calorically restricted to achieve the same effect without actually significantly reducing your caloric intake like that. And that's probably the way it will work. And it's extremely valuable and interesting research that needs to be aggressively pursued because there's such great potential there.
Okay, now let's leave the animal kingdom and talk strictly about humans. In your book, you mentioned the fact that the life expectancy for Americans at the beginning of the 20th century was not very long at all. less than 50 years of age. And yet there's been an increase into the 70s since then. Some people think it's sanitation. Other people think it's antibiotics and vaccines. But what are your thoughts about looking at the long-term life expectancy of humans going back to ancient days, through the Middle Ages, to the turn of the century, to present-day times?
Well, going back to ancient times, there's evidence to suggest that life expectancy, for example, during the time of the ancient Egyptians, was probably somewhere in the 20s. Nobody knows exactly where it was, but it's likely to have been in the 20s. We achieved a very small incremental increase over the millennia to the beginning of the 20th, the beginning of the 19th and 20th centuries, when life expectancy rose up to about between 45 and 50 in the United States, anyway. And then you saw this quantum leap in life expectancy during the 20th century from 50 to close to 80. And that was largely attributable to dramatic reductions in early age mortality, infant, child, and maternal mortality, principally as a result of sanitation, public health, refrigeration, foods, and so forth. It's, the introduction of antibiotics occurred after most of the declines in the death rates occurred at younger ages and contributed relatively a small amount to the rise in life expectancy in the 20th century. Now, in the latter part of the 20th century, there have been notable reductions in death rates at middle and older ages, even from heart disease, from some forms of cancer. And so you see, two forces contributing during the 20th century: the early age mortality declines at the beginning, and the later age mortality declines at the end, which explains, by the way, why the more recent increases in life expectancy have been smaller than the ones that occurred at the beginning of the 20th century. When you save children from dying, you add very rapidly to life expectancy. When you save middle-aged and older people from dying from fatal diseases, chronic fatal diseases, you add a relatively smaller amount.
Now, it turns out that Japanese women have some of the longest life expectancies on the planet Earth. It's almost approaching 90. So we're talking about 50% of Japanese women essentially getting into their late 80s and into their 90s. Some people say it's diet, a fish diet that's low in fat. But what are your thoughts about the demographics of different societies?
Well, first of all, for Japanese women, it's just above 85. It might be approaching 86. And you have to realize that there's a huge difference between 85 and 90. It's not the same as between 50 and 55. And the reason is fairly straightforward. To raise life expectancy up when you're at these very high levels is extremely difficult because you're pushing up against the basic biological process of aging itself. There's no question that subgroups of the population, such as those in Okinawa, Japan, for example, have much higher life expectancies. The actual force involved is not yet understood. It's not like we can, here in the U.S., adopt the lifestyle of the Japanese. I know some people have suggested this, including some friends of mine who study the Okinawa diet, suggested that you can somehow get Americans to live as long as the Okinawans by adopting this particular lifestyle. And there's no evidence to suggest that would be the case unless, of course, we were all Japanese here in the United States, and that isn't the case. There are genetic factors that are influencing the risk of death and duration of life, and those are things that we simply cannot control, at least not yet, anyway. But there's no question that subgroups of the population do experience greater longevity than other subgroups, and that is a fascinating area to study, by the way, because it would appear as though there are genes that exist within the human genome that influence duration of life, and they may be more highly concentrated in some subgroups relative to others.
Okay, now let's talk about genes, because that's, of course, where most of the breakthroughs are being made in the last few years. Again, there's no fountain of youth. No one in the genetics area is claiming to have solved the aging process, but there's been lots of very interesting studies. First of all, there's something called progeria, a genetic disease that's been intensely studied in which children die of old age. They look like plucked chickens, and they die of heart attacks as teenagers. Could you elaborate on that very strange disease?
Well, it appears on this, progeria appears on the surface anyway to be a phenomenon of accelerated aging, but there's evidence to suggest it is not. There are lots of things that don't occur in these children that occur in the aging phenotype of individuals who actually do make it out to older ages. So I would be cautious about thinking of progeria as accelerated aging. It is certainly interesting to study these individuals, and you have to realize that it's always easy to do something to yourself that will accelerate aging. I mean, we do it all the time, quite frankly.
Well, I'm afraid that's it for Exploration. Once again, this is Dr. Michio Kaku, Professor of Theoretical Physics at the City College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and this is Exploration. Our special guest has been Professor Jay Olshansky, an expert on public health and the aging process. Good day.